An old peasant woman, her hands calloused from hard work on the land, walked through the dusty streets of a small village in medieval Spain. In her trembling hands, she carried a small bouquet of completely wilted flowers, yellowed petals falling along the path. The villagers mocked her. "What gift is this for Our Lady?" But what happened the next morning left the entire community in tears. A miracle so extraordinary that it forever changed the life of that woman, and all who witnessed the infinite power of the Virgin Mary. This is the true story of how the simplest faith can move mountains and transform the impossible into reality. You are about to discover one of the most touching miracles ever recorded in the history of Marian devotion. It was the year 1347, in the small village of Santa Maria de los Remedios, in the province of Toledo, Spain. The world lived under the shadow of the Black Death that ravaged Europe, claiming thousands of lives and leaving entire communities devastated. In that mountainous region, where the cold wind cut like blades and the sun rarely warmed afflicted hearts, lived a community of peasants who fought daily for survival. The village was small, with no more than 200 souls, all united by their Catholic faith and deep devotion to the Blessed Virgin. In the center of the main square stood a modest chapel dedicated to Our Lady of Remedies, built with rustic stones quarried from the nearby mountains. Inside the chapel, on the simple but well-kept altar, rested a carved wooden image of the Virgin Mary, painted in soft colors that time had made even more beautiful. It was in this chapel that the villagers gathered daily for prayer, especially during those difficult times when the plague threatened to reach their lands. The women brought wildflowers gathered from the surrounding fields, the men lit candles with whatever wax they could produce, and the children sang simple hymns learned from their mothers and grandmothers. Among all the devout people in the village, there was one woman who stood out for her simplicity and the depth of her faith. Her name was Maria Esperanza, a 62-year-old widow who had lost her husband 5 years earlier to a fever that devastated part of the region. Since then, she had lived alone in a small stone house on the outskirts of the village, surviving on what she could grow in her small garden and the occasional kindness of more prosperous neighbors. Maria Esperanza neo era uma mulher instruida. Neo sabia ler nem escrever, conhecia apenas as oricos básicas que havia decorado ao longo da vida. E sua compreensão de doutrina católica limitava ao que ouvia nos sermos dominicais do Padre Alfonso, o parroco local. Mas o que lhe faltava conhecimento, sobrava-lhe amor genuíno por Deus e por Nossa Senhora. Todas as manhãs, antes mesmo do nascer do sol, Maria Esperanza caminhava sua pequena horta e colhia as melhores flores que conseguia encontrar. Rosas silvestres, margaritas, algumas violetas quando a estação permitia, ou simplesmente ramos com folhas verdes quando as flores eram escassas. Com estas ofertas simples, dirigia-se a capela para apresentar seu presente diário à Virgem Maria. O ritual de Maria Esperanza era sempre o mesmo. Chegava a capela quando ainda estava vazia, ajoelhava-se diante da imagem de Nossa Senhora, depositava suas flores aos pés da estátua, e permanecia ali oração silenciosa por longos minutos. Suas preces não eram elaboradas. Resumiam-se a agradecimentos pela vida, pedidos de proteção para a aldeia, e súplicas pela alma do falecido marido. Depois, levantava-se, fazia o sinal da cruz, e seguia para cumprir suas tarefas diárias. Os demais aldeos conheciam bem este habito de viúva. Alguns admiravam sua constância e devoção, outros consideravam-na pouco excêntrica, mas todos respeitavam sua sinceridade. O Padre Alfonso frequentemente comentava com outros paroquianos que Maria Esperanza era exemplo vivo de fé simples e pura, do tipo que Jesus Cristo havia elogiado quando diz que era necessário tornar-se como uma criança para entrar no reino dos céus. Se você está gostando desta história de fé e milagres, Neoesia skikadesi inscreverem nosso canal paraneo perder nenem episodio sobre os prodigios de Nossa Senhora ao longo de historia. O outono de 1347 foi particularmente rigoroso naquela regio de Espanha. As chuvas chegaram cedo e duraram semanas, seguidas por frio intenso que matou muitas das plantas antes do tempo. A pequena horta de Maria Esperança, que sempre havia sido sua fonte de flores para a Virgem, não resistiu às intempéries. Uma após outra, suas roseiras foram sucumbindo, suas margaridas murcharam, e mesmo as ervas mais resistentes começaram a amarelecer e morrer. Para uma mulher cuja vida espiritual girava torno de oferta diária de flores à Virgem Maria, aquela situação representava uma aflição enorme. Maria Esperança passava horas sua horta devastada, tentando encontrar qualquer sinal de vida entre as plantas mortas. Escavava a terra com as mãos, procurando por bulbos que ainda pudessem brotar, regava os restos de plantas na esperança de milagre, mas nada parecia funcionar. An old peasant woman, her hands calloused from hard work on the land, walked through the dusty streets of a small village in medieval Spain. In her trembling hands, she carried a small bouquet of completely wilted flowers, yellowed petals falling along the path. The villagers mocked her. "What gift is this for Our Lady?" But what happened the next morning left the entire community in tears. A miracle so extraordinary that it forever changed the life of that woman, and all who witnessed the infinite power of the Virgin Mary. This is the true story of how the simplest faith can move mountains and transform the impossible into reality. You are about to discover one of the most touching miracles ever recorded in the history of Marian devotion. It was the year 1347, in the small village of Santa Maria de los Remedios, in the province of Toledo, Spain. The world lived under the shadow of the Black Death that ravaged Europe, claiming thousands of lives and leaving entire communities devastated. In that mountainous region, where the cold wind cut like blades and the sun rarely warmed afflicted hearts, lived a community of peasants who fought daily for survival. The village was small, with no more than 200 souls, all united by their Catholic faith and deep devotion to the Blessed Virgin. In the center of the main square stood a modest chapel dedicated to Our Lady of Remedies, built with rustic stones quarried from the nearby mountains. Inside the chapel, on the simple but well-kept altar, rested a carved wooden image of the Virgin Mary, painted in soft colors that time had made even more beautiful. It was in this chapel that the villagers gathered daily for prayer, especially during those difficult times when the plague threatened to reach their lands. The women brought wildflowers gathered from the surrounding fields, the men lit candles with whatever wax they could produce, and the children sang simple hymns learned from their mothers and grandmothers. Among all the devout people in the village, there was one woman who stood out for her simplicity and the depth of her faith. Her name was Maria Esperanza, a 62-year-old widow who had lost her husband 5 years earlier to a fever that devastated part of the region. Since then, she had lived alone in a small stone house on the outskirts of the village, surviving on what she could grow in her small garden and the occasional kindness of more prosperous neighbors. For a few days, she tried to maintain her tradition by gathering flowers in the fields surrounding the village, but the situation there was no better. The harsh winter had killed virtually all the vegetation, and what little remained was in the hands of other villagers who also needed plants for various purposes: home remedies, spices for their meager diet, or even fuel to heat their homes. A whole week passed without Maria Esperanza being able to bring a single flower to Our Lady. For the first time in more than 5 years, since her husband's death, she was unable to perform that ritual she considered sacred. Distress gripped her heart. She felt as if she were failing the Virgin Mary, as if her devotion were not enough to overcome this obstacle. During these flowerless days, Maria Esperanza continued to go to the chapel every morning, but she arrived empty-handed. She knelt before the image of Our Lady and asked forgiveness for not being able to bring her usual offering. Her prayers became longer and more anguished. She felt something fundamental was missing from her spiritual life, a connection that had been severed by the absence of flowers. Father Alfonso noticed the change in the devout widow's behavior. During a conversation after Sunday Mass, he tried to console her, explaining that God certainly understood her situation and that sincere prayers were more valuable than any material gift. But Maria Esperanza couldn't find solace. For her, the flowers weren't just a gift, they were a tangible expression of her love, a way of communicating to the Virgin Mary that she was constantly thinking of her and wished to honor her in the best way possible. It was then, on the 10th day of not being able to pick a single fresh flower, Maria Esperanza made a decision that would change her life forever. While rummaging through her devastated garden once again, she found some flowers that had wilted weeks ago but still retained some of their original form. They were roses that had once been red but now had a yellowish and brownish hue. The petals were dry and brittle, the stems darkened and fragile. Any sensible person would have discarded those dead flowers, considering them unfit for any purpose. But Maria Esperanza, driven by an impulse she couldn't fully explain, decided to pick them. With infinite care, as if they were the most precious flowers in the world, she cut the dried stems and gathered a small bouquet of those dead roses. As she walked toward the chapel that December morning, Maria Esperanza knew her decision might seem strange to the other villagers. She could already imagine the comments they would make. Poor Maria has lost her mind. What kind of gift is this for Our Lady? She should be ashamed of herself for bringing dead flowers to church. And, indeed, that was exactly what happened. On the way to the chapel, she passed several people just beginning their morning activities. Dona Carmen, the blacksmith's wife, looked disdainfully at the wilted bouquet and remarked loudly, "Maria, for God's sake, what flowers are these? Aren't you ashamed of bringing such dead things to Our Lady?" Pedro, the butcher, laughed openly when he saw the scene. "This woman has completely lost her mind. I thought she was devout, but now she's mocking the Virgin with these rotten flowers." Even some children, influenced by the adults' comments, began pointing and whispering to each other as Maria Esperanza passed. Little Juan, the baker's son, ran to his mother, shouting, "Mama, Senora Maria is bringing dead flowers to church." Every comment, every disapproving look, every critical whisper stabbed Maria Esperanza's heart. She felt her cheeks burning with shame, her hands trembling as she held her bouquet of wilted flowers. For a moment, she wanted to go home, throw those flowers in the trash, and forget the whole embarrassing situation. But something stronger than shame urged her forward. An inner voice, which she interpreted as the Virgin Mary herself, seemed to say to her, "Keep going, my daughter. I see your heart, not just your offerings." With this mysterious force sustaining her faltering steps, Maria Esperanza reached the chapel. As always, she was the first person there. The church was empty, silent, illuminated only by the soft light that filtered through the small windows. The silence was broken only by the sound of her footsteps on the stone floor and the dry rustle of the dead flowers she carried. She walked to the altar where the image of Our Lady of Remedies rested. The wooden statue seemed to look at her with those painted eyes, full of compassion and understanding. Maria Esperanza knelt in the same spot as always, but this time her prayer was different. Instead of simply laying the flowers and beginning her usual supplications, she first asked for forgiveness. "My dear Our Lady," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, "I know these flowers are not worthy of you. I know they are dead, ugly, and fragranceless. I know the people outside are laughing at me and perhaps even offending you with this inadequate gift. But it is all I have to offer at this moment." Her tears began to fall onto the dry petals as she continued, "I couldn't find any beautiful flowers, any fresh roses, any fragrant daisies. My garden has died, the fields are devastated, and I have no money to buy flowers in the city. But my love for you remains the same. My devotion has not diminished. If I could, I would give you all the roses in the world, all the most fragrant lilies, all the most delicate violets. She raised the small bouquet of wilted flowers toward the statue. Accept these dead flowers as a symbol of my living love. Accept this meager offering as an expression of my spiritual richness. I know you see my heart, and my heart is full of love for you, even though my hands can only offer these lifeless flowers. With infinite care, Maria Esperanza placed the bouquet at the feet of the statue, in the same spot where she usually placed her offerings of fresh flowers. The wilted roses seemed even sadder and more inappropriate in that sacred setting, contrasting sharply with the serene beauty of the image of Our Lady. After placing the flowers, she remained kneeling for longer than usual, as if to compensate with prolonged prayer for the inadequacy of her offering. She recited several Hail Marys, prayed the rosary with a simple rosary she always carried, and spent long minutes in silent contemplation. It was no coincidence that you've reached this point in this story. Our Lady has a plan for each of us, and perhaps she wants to touch your heart through this story. If you feel this spiritual connection, consider subscribing to our channel to follow more stories of faith and devotion. When she finally got up to leave the chapel, Maria Esperanza took one last look at her wilted flowers at the Virgin's feet. They seemed even more inadequate in the morning light that now shone brighter through the windows. For a moment, she wanted to take them back, to hide them before others arrived for morning mass and saw this shameful offering. But she decided to leave them there. If Our Lady truly saw her heart, as she believed, then she would surely understand the sincere love behind that imperfect offering. With this hope mixed with apprehension, Maria Esperanza left the chapel and returned home, mentally preparing herself for another day of malicious comments and disapproving looks. The day passed slowly for the lonely widow. She tried to keep busy with her household chores, but her mind kept returning to the wilted flowers she had left in the chapel. She wondered repeatedly if she had done the right thing, if it wouldn't have been better to wait until she could get suitable flowers, if her actions had been a display of disrespect disguised as devotion. During the afternoon, she avoided leaving the house to avoid facing the neighbors' comments. She knew that news of her inadequate gift to Our Lady had already spread throughout the small village. In such a small community, any unusual occurrence quickly became the topic of conversation. Indeed, the episode of the wilted flowers was a topic of discussion in several homes that day. Dona Carmen told the story to all the women she met at the public well. Did you see what Maria did today? She brought some rotten flowers to Our Lady. Really rotten, yellow, without petals. A disgrace. Pedro the butcher didn't miss the opportunity to joke about the matter. It seems Maria wants to save money on her offerings. Now she's taking garden waste to church. Maybe next week she'll bring some rotten potatoes. Even people who normally respected Maria Esperanza began to question her behavior. Dona Isabel, an elderly woman who had always admired the widow's devotion, commented to her daughters, "I don't understand what's gotten into Maria. She was always so respectful of Our Lady. Why would she bring dead flowers to church? Maybe loneliness is affecting her judgment." Father Alfonso himself learned of the incident from several people who came to tell him the story throughout the day. Initially, he was concerned, thinking that Maria Esperanza might be going through some kind of spiritual or emotional crisis. He decided to speak with her after afternoon mass to better understand the situation. When it came time for afternoon mass, the chapel was fuller than usual. Many people had come not only for the usual prayer service, but also out of curiosity to see Maria Esperanza's famous dead flowers. There was an atmosphere of anticipation and whispered comments as the faithful took their seats. Maria Esperanza arrived a few minutes after Mass began, as was her custom. She preferred not to attract attention by arriving too early or too late. She took her usual seat in one of the middle pews and tried to concentrate on Father Alfonso's prayers. But she could feel the curious and critical gazes of several people, and this made it difficult to concentrate. Throughout Mass, she avoided looking toward the altar where she had placed her wilted flowers that morning. She was afraid to see the disapproving expression on the priest's face, to confirm how inappropriate her offering seemed in that sacred setting. After Mass ended, Father Alfonso motioned for Maria Esperanza to come closer. She obeyed with a racing heart, certain she would receive a reprimand for her inappropriate behavior that morning. "Maria," the priest said gently but worriedly, "I need to talk to you about the flowers you brought this morning. Several people have come to me, concerned about your state of mind. They told me you brought dead flowers for Our Lady. Is that true?" The poor woman lowered her head, feeling the weight of shame. "Yes, Father Alfonso. It's true. I know I shouldn't have done that, but I couldn't find any living flowers. My garden died in the cold, and I couldn't afford pretty flowers. But I couldn't go another day without bringing something for Our Lady." The priest studied her face for a moment, seeing the sincerity and anguish in her eyes. "Maria, you know that God doesn't need our material offerings, don't you? He rejoices much more with our sincere hearts than with expensive or beautiful gifts." "I know, Father," she replied, her voice trembling. "But I've always brought flowers to Our Lady. It's my way of showing my love for her. When I couldn't bring anything, I felt like I was failing her." Father Alfonso placed his hand on the distressed woman's shoulder. "I understand your heart, Maria. Your devotion is admirable. But perhaps it's better, when there aren't suitable flowers, to just come with your prayers. Our Lady certainly understands your situation and isn't offended by the lack of material offerings." Maria Esperanza nodded, promising to follow the parish priest's advice. But deep down, she still felt there was something special about that gesture of bringing the wilted flowers, something she couldn't explain but that had driven her to act that way. After her conversation with the priest, she returned home carrying an even heavier burden. Now, in addition to the shame of her neighbor's comments, she also felt as though she had disappointed the village priest himself. That night, Maria Esperanza had trouble sleeping. She tossed and turned, thinking about what had happened during the day, questioning her motivations and the appropriateness of her behavior. She got up several times to pray, asking God and the Virgin Mary for guidance on how to proceed in the coming days. During her nightly prayers, she felt a strange peace, as if a loving presence were present in her small room. It wasn't a feeling she could describe in words, but it was comforting and gave her strength to face shame and criticism. It was around 3 in the morning that she finally managed to fall asleep, after a long inner conversation with Our Lady. In her dreams, she saw herself walking through a wonderful garden, filled with flowers of every imaginable color and species. A female figure, dressed in blue and white, walked beside her, but she couldn't see her face clearly. In the dream, the mysterious figure picked flowers from the garden and offered them to Maria Esperanza, saying in a voice as soft as a breeze, "These are for you, my dear daughter. Take them as a sign of my love." When she woke, it was almost 5 in the morning, and her first sensation was one of inexplicable joy. Despite having slept only a few hours, Maria Esperanza felt strangely refreshed. She got out of bed with an energy she hadn't felt in weeks, as if she'd been recharged during her sleep. She dressed quickly, said her usual morning prayers, and prepared to go to the chapel, as she did every morning. This time, however, she didn't have any flowers to bring. Following Father Alfonso's advice, she decided to go with just her prayers, without worrying about material offerings. After all, as the parish priest had explained, God was more pleased with sincere hearts than with beautiful gifts. She left home a little earlier than usual, wanting to get to the chapel before others showed up. She wasn't sure how she would be received by the other parishioners after the previous day's incident, and she preferred to avoid unnecessary embarrassment. As she walked through the still deserted streets of the village, Maria Esperanza observed the landscape around her. The early morning chill had left a thin layer of ice on the cobblestones, and steam rose from her mouth with each breath. The sky was clear, with stars still visible, although the first signs of dawn could already be seen on the horizon. She arrived at the chapel while it was still completely dark. The heavy wooden door creaked slightly as she pushed it open. As always, the interior of the church was silent and serene, illuminated only by the soft light of the candles that remained lit throughout the night before the image of Our Lady. Maria Esperanza went to her usual place of prayer and knelt before the altar. It was then that something happened that would change her life forever and profoundly mark the history of that small Spanish village. The wilted flowers she had laid at the feet of the Virgin the previous morning were gone. In their place was a bouquet of absolutely splendid red roses, with velvety petals that seemed to have been picked at that very moment. The perfume emanating from them was of a softness and intensity she had never experienced. It was as if all the most fragrant roses in the world had been concentrated in that small bouquet. Our history is reaching a truly extraordinary moment. If you're touched by this story of faith, be sure to subscribe to our channel, because you won't want to miss the outcome of this extraordinary miracle. For a long moment, Maria Esperanza stood completely paralyzed, unable to believe her eyes. She blinked several times, thinking she might be dreaming or that her eyes were playing tricks on her. But the roses remained there, more real and beautiful than any flower she had ever seen in her life. Slowly, her hands trembling with emotion and reverence, she reached out her fingers toward the flowers. When she touched the petals, they were incredibly soft and fresh, as if they had been created in that instant. The perfume intensified with her touch, filling the entire chapel with a heavenly fragrance. Tears began to stream down the aged furrows of her face as she understood what had happened. Our Lady had transformed her withered, dead flowers into the most beautiful roses that ever existed. The Virgin Mary had seen her sincere heart behind the imperfect offering and rewarded her faith with an extraordinary miracle. Maria Esperanza fell prostrate on the chapel floor, sobbing with gratitude and adoration. Through her tears, she whispered prayers of thanksgiving. "Thank you, my most holy Virgin. Thank you for seeing my heart. Thank you for accepting my poor offering. Thank you for this miracle I don't deserve." She remained prostrate for several minutes, feeling a divine presence around her unlike anything she had ever experienced before. It was as if the Virgin Mary herself were there, at that moment, blessing her with her maternal and loving presence. When she finally managed to compose herself enough to stand, Maria Esperanza looked again at the miraculous roses. They remained there, more beautiful and fragrant than before, as tangible confirmation that what had really happened and was not a figment of her imagination. It was at that moment that she heard footsteps approaching the chapel entrance. It was Father Alfonso, who usually arrived early to prepare for morning Massachusetts. Maria Esperanza's heart raced. How could she explain this? Who would believe her story? Father Alfonso entered the chapel and immediately noticed something different about the room. The scent of the roses was so intense that it filled the entire church, creating an atmosphere of beauty and holiness he had never experienced in his many years of priesthood. His eyes naturally drifted to the altar, where the red roses shone in the light of the candles like precious jewels. For a moment, he was confused, thinking someone had brought fresh flowers during the early hours of the morning to replace Maria Esperanza's wilted ones. "Maria," he said, approaching the altar, "these roses are magnificent. Who brought them? They're the most beautiful I've ever seen in my life." The poor woman, still kneeling, her face wet with tears, looked at the priest with an expression that mixed joy, fear, and reverence. "Father Alfonso, these are the same flowers I brought yesterday." The wilted flowers, everyone criticized. Our Lady transformed them overnight. The priest looked at her in disbelief, then at the roses, then back at her. He approached the flowers and examined them carefully. They were truly extraordinary, with a perfection and fragrance that seemed supernatural. "Maria, are you sure of what you're saying?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Are you telling me these are the same wilted flowers you brought yesterday?" "Yes, Father. I recognize them. They were 5 wilted roses I picked from my dead garden. They were exactly these, but they were yellowed, dry, and without petals. Now look at them." Father Alfonso moved even closer to the flowers and gently touched them. Their texture was incredibly soft, their scent was heavenly, and there was a quality of light about them that seemed to come from within the petals themselves. In that moment, he understood he was witnessing a true miracle. In his 30 years of priesthood, he had heard many stories of wonders and divine interventions, but he had never witnessed something as concrete and evident as this. "Maria," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "you have been blessed with an extraordinary miracle. Our Lady saw the sincerity of your heart and wanted to show our entire community that she values purity of intention far more than the beauty of the offering." The two remained there, contemplating the miraculous roses, as other parishioners began arriving from morning Massachusetts. The first to enter was Dona Carmen, the blacksmith's wife, who had been one of the most critical the day before. As soon as she entered the chapel, she was struck by the extraordinary scent of the roses. Her eyes immediately drew to the altar, where the flowers shone with indescribable beauty. "Holy Virgin," she exclaimed, "what roses are these? Where did such beautiful flowers come from? I've never seen anything like them in my entire life." Father Alfonso and Maria Esperanza exchanged a meaningful look. The priest decided this was the right moment to reveal the miracle to the entire community. "Dona Carmen," he said solemnly, "these are the flowers Maria brought yesterday. The same ones you and others criticized for being wilted." The woman looked at him in utter disbelief. "That's impossible, Father. Yesterday's flowers were dead, rotten. These are perfect." "That's precisely what makes this event so extraordinary," the priest replied. "Our Lady transformed Maria's wilted flowers into perfect roses overnight. It's a true miracle." Dona Carmen was completely speechless. She approached the flowers, touched them delicately, smelled their divine scent, and then turned to Maria Esperanza with tears in her eyes. "Maria, forgive me," she said, falling to her knees. "Forgive me for mocking your offering. Forgive me for not seeing the purity of your heart. Our Lady showed us that I was wrong, that we were all wrong." Other people continued arriving for morning mass, and each of them had the same reaction of amazement and reverence before the miraculous roses. Pedro, the butcher who had joked the day before, entered the chapel laughing and making joking comments about Maria's rotten flowers, but his expression changed completely when he saw the spectacle before him. "This is not possible," he murmured, approaching the altar with hesitant steps. "These can't be the same flowers as yesterday." Father Alfonso repeated the explanation of the miracle to each new parishioner who arrived. The news spread quickly, and soon the small chapel was packed with people who came to witness the miracle with their own eyes. Dona Isabel, the elderly woman who had questioned Maria's judgment, arrived leaning on her cane and, upon seeing the roses, fell to her knees in the middle of the church nave. "Forgive me, Most Holy Virgin, for having doubted your faithful servant. Forgive me for not having recognized the holiness disguised as simplicity." The children who had mocked Maria the day before now looked at her with a mixture of reverential awe and admiration. Little Juan, the baker's son, tugged at his mother's skirt and whispered, "Mama, is Maria a saint?" That morning's mass was unlike any other in the history of that small village. Father Alfonso spoke about the importance of humility, about how God chooses the simple and humble to manifest His glory, about how genuine faith is more precious than refined gold. Throughout the service, the miraculous roses perfumed the room with their heavenly fragrance, reminding everyone present that they were experiencing something truly supernatural. Maria Esperanza, who the day before had been the object of ridicule and criticism, now found herself at the center of a veneration that made her deeply uncomfortable. She didn't want to be seen as special or holy. In her simple heart, she knew that the miracle had happened not through her own merits, but through the infinite goodness of Our Lady. After Mass, a crowd gathered around her. Everyone wanted to touch her, ask for her blessing, and solicit her prayers. Some people began calling her the Saint of Roses, others, the Chosen One of the Virgin. But Maria Esperanza, with her characteristic humility, refused all such labels. "Please," she said to everyone who approached, "I'm not a saint. I'm just a sinner who loves Our Lady. The miracle happened because she is good, not because I'm special. Glorify her, not me." But her humble words only increased people's admiration. In a time when the Church was marked by examples of arrogance and ostentation, Maria Esperanza's genuine simplicity shone like a beacon of spiritual authenticity. During the following days, people from neighboring villages began arriving to see the miraculous roses and meet the woman who had been blessed with such a miracle. The small chapel, which normally welcomed only local residents, began to receive dozens of visitors daily. The miraculous roses remained fresh and fragrant for 40 consecutive days, a period that Father Alfonso recognized as symbolically significant, recalling the 40 days Jesus spent in the desert, the 40 days of the flood, and so many other 40-day periods mentioned in Scripture. During these 40 days, many minor miracles were reported by those who visited the roses. A barren woman became pregnant after praying before the flowers. A man with severe arthritis regained full movement in his hands after touching them. A child suffering from seizures was completely cured after his mother prayed a novena before the miraculous roses. Father Alfonso, a prudent man and knowledgeable in the rules of the Church, carefully documented each of these events, collecting witnesses and evidence. He knew that if these miracles were authentic, they would need to be reported to higher ecclesiastical authorities. Meanwhile, Maria Esperanza continued her simple life, but now with a completely new dimension. Every day, people came to her for advice, prayers, or simply to be in the presence of someone who had been so visibly blessed by God. She received all these people with kindness, but always directed their attention to Our Lady, never to herself. Her words were simple, her prayers were basic, but there was an authenticity in them that deeply touched the hearts of those who listened. "Our Lady does not look at our offerings," she repeatedly told visitors. "She looks at our hearts. It doesn't matter if you are rich or poor, educated or ignorant. What matters is that you truly love her." One of the most touching aspects of the story was how Maria Esperanza continued bringing flowers to the Virgin every day, even after the miracle. When she could find fresh flowers, she brought them. When she couldn't, she brought leaves, twigs, or even just her prayers. But she never again stopped making her morning visit to the chapel. On the 40th day after the miracle, something equally extraordinary happened. The miraculous roses, which had remained fresh and fragrant throughout that period, began to glow with a soft light during the evening Massachusetts. The light was so intense that it illuminated the entire chapel, yet it was at the same time soft and comforting, not blinding anyone's eyes. Father Alfonso was celebrating Mass when the phenomenon began. He stopped mid-consecration, looked at the luminous roses, and realized he was witnessing another extraordinary miracle. The entire congregation fell into absolute silence, contemplating this supernatural manifestation. The roses shone for exactly 3 minutes, during which time an even more intense fragrance than usual filled the entire chapel. When the light finally faded, the roses had completely disappeared. In the place where they had stood for 40 days, only a small mound of golden petals remained, retaining a gentle but lasting scent. Father Alfonso collected these golden petals in a special reliquary, where they remained for many years, continuing to exude a delicate fragrance and be a source of consolation for the faithful who venerated them. News of the miracles in the small village of Santa Maria de los Remedios reached the ears of the Bishop of Toledo, Fernando de Aragon, a man known for his prudence and rigor in evaluating supernatural phenomena. Fernando decided to send a commission of theologians and investigators to examine the reported events. Over the course of 3 weeks, these men interviewed dozens of witnesses, examined documents prepared by Father Alfonso, and thoroughly investigated every aspect of the reported miracles. The commission's conclusion was unanimous. The events that occurred in the chapel of Santa Maria de los Remedios were authentically supernatural and could not be explained by natural causes. The official report recognized the transformation of the wilted flowers into perfect roses as a genuine miracle performed through the intercession of the Virgin Mary. Maria Esperanza was summoned to testify before the Episcopal Commission. Despite her simplicity and lack of formal education, her answers impressed the investigators with their honesty, humility, and spiritual depth. "Your Reverend," she said to the lead investigating bishop, "I don't understand why Our Lady chose such an insignificant person as me to perform this miracle. I simply love her and wanted to honor her as best I could. If my dead flowers became alive and beautiful, it was because her love is so great that it can transform anything." This simple yet profound response was recorded in official documents and became one of the most frequently cited statements in subsequent studies of the miracle. The official recognition of the miracles brought significant changes to life in the small village. The chapel was expanded to accommodate the growing number of pilgrims who came from all over Spain to venerate Our Lady of Remedies and see the place where wilted flowers became perfect roses. Maria Esperanza, however, remained exactly the same simple and humble person she had always been. She refused every offer of money from devotees, every invitation to live in better conditions, every proposal to move to convents or religious communities. "My place is here," she would say, "close to my beloved Virgin, living the same simple way I always have. She chose me as I am. Why would I change now?" Her constancy in simplicity was perhaps the greatest miracle of all. At a time when many people would exploit such a situation for personal gain, Maria Esperanza remained absolutely true to her humble and selfless nature. During the following years, she became an unofficial spiritual advisor to hundreds of people who sought her out. His advice was always simple, based on love for God and the Virgin Mary, the importance of humility, charity towards others, and trust in divine providence. "When you don't know what to do," was one of her most frequent pieces of advice. "Kneel before Our Lady and tell her everything, as a child tells his problems to his mother. She always knows what is best for us." Many people reported that Maria Esperanza's simple advice had transformed their lives more profoundly than eloquent sermons from famous preachers. There was an authenticity and lived experience in her words that touched hearts in a unique way. The miracle of the flowers also had an impact on the spiritual life of the entire region. Many people who had strayed from the faith returned to religious practice after learning about Maria Esperanza's story. Others deepened their Marian devotion, inspired by the example of simple and genuine love she represented. Father Alfonso noted that in the months following the miracle, the number of confessions in his parish tripled, masses became more attended, and a general atmosphere of religious fervor established itself in the community. "It is as if Our Lady had used Mary's pure heart to awaken the dormant faith of many hearts," he wrote in a letter to the bishop. The miracle of the flowers was only the beginning. The true miracle lies in the spiritual transformation that followed. 10 years after the original miracle, Maria Esperanza continued her daily routine of bringing flowers to the Virgin. Her health had remained surprisingly good for a woman her age, something many attributed to a special blessing from Our Lady. One December morning, exactly 10 years to the day after she had brought the wilted flowers, she was found kneeling before the image of the Virgin, with a serene smile on her face and a small bouquet of fresh roses in her hands. She had died during prayer, so peacefully that she seemed to be merely sleeping. The roses she had brought that last morning remained fresh for another 40 days, repeating the original miracle and confirming to all who knew her that Maria Esperanza had truly been a soul chosen by God. Her funeral was an extraordinary event. People came from dozens of cities to pay their last respects to the simple woman who had been the instrument of such a beautiful miracle. Throughout the ceremony, a gentle scent of roses filled the chapel, even though there were no flowers present. Father Alfonso, already an elderly man when Maria passed away, delivered one of the most moving homilies of his career. Maria Esperanza taught us that holiness lies not in grand gestures or spectacular miracles, but in simple fidelity to God's love. She showed us that Our Lady values a sincere heart more than all the riches of the world. After her death, many people began to report graces received through Maria Esperanza's intercession. Unexplained healings, family reconciliations, spiritual conversions, and a variety of other spiritual and material benefits were attributed to her intercession. The Church, following its careful procedures, began to investigate these new miracles. The process for Maria Esperanza's beatification was officially opened in 1445, and she was recognized as blessed in 1456, just 100 years after her death. The story of the wilted flowers that became perfect roses began to be told throughout Europe as an extraordinary example of how God is pleased with simplicity and genuine humility. It became one of the most popular Marian narratives of the Middle Ages, inspiring countless works of art, literature, and music. Centuries later, the chapel of Santa Maria de los Remedios remains a place of pilgrimage. The original image of the Virgin, before which Maria Esperanza laid her wilted flowers, still receives thousands of devotees annually. At the site where the miraculous roses remained for 40 days, a bronze plaque was placed with the inscription, "Here Our Lady transformed wilted flowers into perfect roses, showing that she sees our hearts, not our offerings." Maria Esperanza's story teaches us profound lessons about the nature of faith and genuine devotion. In a world often obsessed with appearances and external grandeur, she reminds us that God delights in the sincerity of the humble heart. The miracle of the wilted flowers was not just a physical transformation of dried petals into fresh roses. It was a powerful demonstration of how divine love can transform any offering, no matter how inadequate it may seem to human eyes, into something beautiful and precious when presented with a sincere heart. Maria Esperanza's life also teaches us the importance of constancy in devotion. She did not bring flowers to the Virgin only when she felt inspired or when beautiful flowers were available. She maintained her devotion even when she could only offer what others considered inadequate or shameful. Her humility after the miracle is perhaps the most important lesson in all of history. In a time when many people could have used such an event to gain fame, power, or wealth, Mary remained exactly the same simple person she always was, directing all the glory to Our Lady. The lasting impact of her story through the centuries demonstrates how authentic examples of holiness continue to inspire and transform lives long after their protagonists have left this world. The tradition of bringing flowers to Our Lady, which existed long before Maria Esperanza, took on even deeper meaning after her miracle. Devotees around the world began to remember that it is not the beauty or value of flowers that matters, but the love that accompanies them. Many people, inspired by her story, began bringing their own wilted flowers to the Virgin Mary. Not necessarily physical flowers, but their limitations, their failures, their imperfect offerings, trusting that Our Lady's maternal love can transform anything into an instrument of grace. The story also reminds us of the importance of not judging others' devotional practices by outward appearances. Maria's neighbors who mocked her wilted flowers learned a valuable lesson about how our human judgments can be completely misguided. Father Alfonso, a privileged witness to the entire event, wrote in his final records, "I learned from Maria that miracles do not happen to impress the proud, but to console the humble. Our Lady chose a poor and simple widow to show that her love does not depend on our greatness, but on our sincerity." This story also beautifully illustrates Catholic doctrine on the intercession of the saints and, especially, the unique role of the Virgin Mary as the mediator of all graces. Maria Esperanza did not pray directly to Jesus Christ asking for the miracle. She simply offered her wilted flowers to the Virgin with sincere love, and it was through this maternal mediation that divine grace manifested itself. The number 40, which appears repeatedly in the story, the 40 days that the roses remained fresh, the 40 days that the last roses remained fresh after her death, resonates deeply in biblical tradition as a period of preparation, purification, and spiritual transformation. The preservation of the golden petals for many years after the roses faded also tells us how God's miracles leave lasting signs that continue to nourish the faith of future generations. Today, when we visit Marian pilgrimage sites around the world, we often see simple devotees bringing their humble offerings: wildflowers, inexpensive candles, small objects with no commercial value but imbued with personal meaning. The story of Maria Esperanza helps us understand that each of these offerings is precious in the eyes of Our Lady when accompanied by genuine love. In our modern age, marked by technological sophistication and frequent distancing from the sacred, the story of the wilted flowers invites us to rediscover the beauty of spiritual simplicity. It reminds us that we don't need grand gestures or costly offerings to touch God's heart. We only need sincere hearts and genuine love. The transformation of the wilted flowers into perfect roses also serves as a powerful metaphor for the transformation God works in our own lives when we surrender ourselves to Him with complete trust. Our limitations, failures, and imperfections can become instruments of grace when placed in the loving hands of divine providence. Maria Esperanza lived and died in the relative obscurity of a small Spanish village, but her example of simple and steadfast faith has echoed through the centuries, inspiring millions of people to deepen their own Marian devotion. The beauty of this story lies not only in the spectacular miracle of the flower's transformation, but in the profound lesson it holds about the nature of divine love, a love that sees beyond appearances, that values sincerity above ostentation, that transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary when it encounters truly devoted hearts. When we contemplate our own spiritual lives in light of this story, we are invited to examine our own offerings to God. Perhaps they seem inadequate, withered like Maria Esperanza's flowers. But if they are offered with sincere love, they can become instruments of grace not only for us, but for all those who witness our authentic faith. The story of the wilted flowers thus remains an eternal testament that in the kingdom of God, where the last are first and the humble are exalted, even the simplest offering can become a source of extraordinary miracles when accompanied by the purest love. This extraordinary tale of faith, humility, and divine miracle teaches us that Our Lady is always attentive to gestures of sincere love, no matter how simple they may seem to the eyes of the world. Maria Esperanza, with her wilted flowers transformed into heavenly roses, remains a shining example that true Marian devotion resides not in the grandeur of the offerings, but in the purity of the heart that presents them. May her story inspire in each of us the courage to offer to God and the Blessed Virgin what we have, no matter how imperfect it may seem, trusting that divine love can transform any sincere offering into an instrument of grace and blessing for the entire world.